Adrift in the middle of the ocean, two survivors find themselves aboard an abandoned ship. But they're not alone. Something lurks in the darkness, something with gnawing teeth, countless eyes, and an insatiable hunger. A hunger for fresh meat.
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and we have quite the journey for you to take tonight as we hit the 7 seas for a story about little stowaways turned hungry crew. But before we get to that, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to Weekly Spooky. We really do appreciate it. And if you love what we're doing here, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app, because it really makes a big difference for the show. If you want to support us in an even bigger way, you can head to weeklyspooky.com/join and join 100 other spookies in supporting the show for as little as $1 a month and getting 2 bonus episodes, along with a plethora of audiobooks, creepypasta readings, and so much more. You can find it all at weeklyspooky.com/join. But now for the matter at hand. The ocean is a lonely place. When a ship disappears, sometimes it's just gone. No distress call, no survivors, just another vessel lost to the deep. But sometimes the ship comes back. This story is about 2 men stranded at sea, desperate for rescue, when they stumble upon a ship that shouldn't exist. A ship no one should step foot on, because the moment they climb aboard, they realize they're not alone. Something's watching. Something hungry. Monsters of the oceans are often stuff of legends, except tonight, right after this. The Ship of the Cannibal Rats by David O'Hanlon. This fucking blows, Chance grumbled. Could be worse, Luca said comfortingly. How could this be any worse? The shipping container rocked, not so gently in the waves. A few others bobbed around them amongst the assorted equipment and the corpses of the ship's crew. Dorsal fins of migrating blue sharks darted between the bodies. Occasionally they'd drag one down, or just chomp off a piece, sending the other sharks into a frenzy. A thick fog had persisted since 2 days prior, and the sharks' fins looked like ghosts, flitting around the floating buffet. The ship's captain, McHenry, bobbed in the water with his eyes still open. For whatever reason, the sharks wouldn't eat him, and every so often he floated just right to cast his undead gaze on the stranded men, as if to ask when they'd be joining him. It could be raining again, Luca offered. You know, you're right. Chance let his head fall back on the container with a thud. It would suck if drinkable water started to fall from the sky. It's only been 30 hours since we had a drink, after all. 32, and I'm working on that. Luca walked to the edge of the container. It wasn't uncommon for McHenry to lease space to smugglers. He'd seen the crates hastily loaded in the middle of the night. It didn't look like the drugs they normally picked up. Weapons, maybe. It didn't really matter. Whatever they'd been hauling had brought the ship down fast. Too fast for anyone to react accordingly. 2 of the 3 lifeboats had gone down with the wreckage. The last one was currently adrift and unmanned. Water, food, and an emergency beacon bobbed tauntingly just 100 meters away. 7 dead men floated like lily pads between Luca and salvation. A long fin sliced the surface and then dived down sharply. Make that 6 dead men. "Get away from the edge, you dumbass," Chance grumped. "One of the sharks is going to jump up and bite your ass." "That only happens in the movies. Sharks can't jump." Luca instinctively reached for a pack of cigarettes that wasn't there. "Whales jump out of the water all the time to eat penguins," Chance told him. "You can use the internet for more than porn, you know." "Whales are mammals." "What the hell does that have to do with anything?" "Mammals can jump," Luca shrugged. "Fish swim." "Fuck, I need a smoke." A shark breached the surface, throwing its body onto the container. It swept its open mouth across the edge, sending Luca into a backward stumble before sliding off into the water. Luca landed hard on his ass and slid on the wet metal. He laughed it off, shakily. "So, maybe they can jump," he admitted. "Told you so." The waves slapped the back of Luca's head, and he sat up quickly as a dorsal streaked by. He ran his hand through the mop of hair, looking around suspiciously. Another shark swam by, and Luca felt his stomach knot. He could clearly see the bright blue coloration that gave them their name. Luca leaned over the edge a bit more hesitantly. He eyed the serial number, printed vertically on the corner of the container. The sharks were getting more frantic for their share of the dwindling supply of dead bodies. If he was right, there'd be some fresh meat on the menu soon. "Hey, Chance, what do you think is in this container?" he asked. "Knowing our luck, a speedboat and a case of beer. Why?" "Because I'm pretty sure we're sinking." "Of course we fucking are." "Don't worry," Luca said. "I got a plan." "Of course you fucking do." After a frustrating 2 hours, Luca's plan had come to morbid fruition. Using a makeshift rope of their belts and clothes, he'd lassoed McHenry and 4.5 other dead crew members. He'd laid the bodies out on the container and began lashing them together. Chance begrudgingly helped. "Tie it together," Luca instructed. "We don't want one of those sharks poking its nose through." Chance lifted the stump. "That's going to be an issue. Improvise." "I can't believe we're doing this," Chance said. "It's like a big-ass meat Oreo, only the glass of milk is full of sharks. What makes you think this'll even work?" "A ship's only as good as its crew." Luca pulled the cordage tight, eliciting a spurt of congealed blood across his face. "This was a really good crew." "Why hasn't anyone come for us?" Chance stood up and shielded his eyes from the sun. "The emergency beacon should have signaled as soon as it was submerged." "You heard that explosion." Luca checked the lashings. "Whatever was on board was the kind of shit that gets you renditioned. I saw enough in the Legion, and trust me, we're better off with the sharks. The captain knew that too. We've been running in ghost mode since Liberia." They slid the bodies off the container and back into the ocean. It was a much shorter drop than either man expected. They were sinking faster. There wouldn't be time for a plan B. The raft stayed afloat, but only barely. Luca eased himself on board, and it dipped down. McHenry's head went under. "Shit," Luca whispered. "New plan. I'm going to have to go alone." "And what about me? Would it kill you to trust me?" "It fucking might." "Here goes nothing." Luca pushed off the side of the shipping container and drifted toward the lifeboat. "See? It's working." "Cool. Now hurry up before they eat your boat." They'd already started. One of the blues grabbed McHenry's arm and tore it off, sending the raft spinning. The vessel dipped and bobbed back up. A shark bumped it from below, bucking Luca into the air. His grip held firm, but the landing jostled the bodies beneath him. Another bump from below nearly capsized him. Luca realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The man-made raft floated well enough, but now it looked like a big wounded fish to the simple-minded predators stalking it.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Luca hiked his leg up and waited for a fin to pass by. One got close enough, and he kicked into the water to push off the fish. It gave him a brief surge, but the lifeboat was still too far away to swim for it. Another speeding shark gave the raft a hard nudge that thankfully was in the right direction. 60 meters to go. Luca stretched for a piece of debris, almost toppling overboard in the process. A fin battered his arm as it cut between him and the flotsam. Luca tried again and jerked the scrap metal from the water, hugging to his chest with a triumphant whoop. Luca frantically paddled the water. 50 meters left. 40. Deep red suddenly spread around him, and the raft listed to starboard. He rowed faster, glancing back over his shoulder at Chance. Unspooling entrails floated in his wake. A shark broke the surface, scooping intestines into its wide-open mouth like it were taking a fishing line. The raft lurched. The hollowed body was filling with seawater, and, for the second time in 2 days, Luca was on a sinking ship. A pair of sharks attached the raft from opposite sides. The lashings began to stretch and Luca's legs slipped through. A shark bumped against it, but didn't bite. He knew he wouldn't get lucky twice. He let himself slide between the bodies and sink. Above him, the sharks converged. Blood and unchewed bits clouded Luca's view. A finger floated past him, carried downward by the weight of the wedding band, still encircling it. Chance crawled out onto the edge of the container, looking for any sign of his partner. Nothing. Sharks swam away with parts of the raft, still refusing to take McHenry. The captain swirled around until he was the only person left between Chance and the lifeboat. Water rolled onto the roof of the container, submerging Chance's forearms. A thud drew his attention to the other end. The shark chomped at the air before sliding back into the ocean. Chance sniffled, then let himself cry. No one was left to see him anyhow. If he was lucky, he'd drown before the sharks started to eat him. "Get away from the edge!" Luca shouted. "Sharks can jump, you know." The lifeboat's motor didn't have enough fuel to get them to land, but it was enough to get them away from the feeding frenzy and moving in the general direction of Europe. The strobe on the roof flashed constantly through the night, reminding the men of the vast nothing around them as they took turns on lookout. The night wind was frigid, and despite the supplies stowed aboard, a blanket was not included. Not a real one anyhow. Just a handful of foil ones that folded up into little squares. They didn't do much for the wet, mostly naked sailors. The emergency position indicator was lit. They assumed that meant it was working. Rescue shouldn't have taken too long. Satellites would pick up the signal and relay it to the nearest local user terminal. Then they'd notify the nearest agency, capable of getting to the men. Neither of them knew how far they were from land, however. They sipped at the bottles of water, just to be safe. They should pack extra clothes and lifeboats, Luca said. At least some underwear. There's no way you don't need a fresh pair after your ship sinks. I don't know about you, but I don't ever plan on leaving land again, Chance said, rolling the bottle between his palms. He snickered. This fucking shit is crazy, man. Hey, you see that? The light. It was wrong. Chance pointed stern. The strobe flashed again, and Luca saw what his friend was talking about. Brighter. Like it had reflected off. Oh shit! Luca scrambled to his feet and out the cockpit. Grab the torch! Chance let the flashlight lead as he joined his partner. What is it? Luca pointed up. The strobe bounced off the hull of the small cruise ship. Chance laughed and waved his hands in the air. Hey! We're down here! He shouted. Don't bother, she's not running under power. Luca took the flashlight from him and scanned the side of the ship for markings. We are setting the world record for bad luck. We almost got ran over by a ghost ship. Derelict? Way out here? No one knows for sure, but best guess is there are thousands of them floating around, Luca told him. One got loose in Japan a couple years ago. Almost a year to the day it drifted into Canada. There we go. He shined the light on the vessel's name, moving the beam slowly to make out the letters. A broken tow line clanked against the reinforced hull. Luke turned off the light. Lyudmila Gurchenko? Chance said. Must be Russian. Looks like a discount cruise ship. An ocean liner, Luca corrected him. They were made for transport, not comfort. That's why she's so small. Been retrofitted for the Arctic, too. That hull's up-armored for icebergs. Why do you sound so happy about that? Pack your shit, Wheezy. Luca smiled. We're moving on up. I'm not really digging the idea of being on a creepy-ass ghost ship, Chance said. Got anywhere else to be? Luca scanned the deck for signs of life. Asleep in the lifeboat until daylight, when this won't suck as bad. They made their way to the bridge, shining their lights and windows as they went. No one moved inside. Luca led the way up the steps. The door moved noisily on its hinges. The salty air had rusted them badly, so it didn't swing back and forth, but just inched one way and then the other in plaintive moans. Luca pushed through and swept the flashlight across the bridge. He screamed and stumbled backwards into Chance. Fuck me! What? Chance braced himself to run. What is it? Luca leaned back into the room, letting the light find the floating apparition.
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
The gray-black shape of a man at the helm was nothing more than a forgotten jacket. Luca breathed deeply to steady himself. He wriggled his toes, wondering if the puddle he stood in had been there before he opened the door. He hesitated to enter, letting his heart rate settle back down first. Once it had, he went straight to the jacket to look for clues. Check for any kind of records, he said over his shoulder. Sure thing, boss, Chance chuckled. You scream like a woman, by the way. And you were crying like one on top of the shipping container. Luca picked up the jacket. J.K. Diener Salvage. Looks like old girl was being decommissioned. Think she broke away from port while being towed? Chance's light played across the instruments. Most of the cables had been stripped already. If she was already docked, that means there's not going to be anything useful on board. Might still be beds. Luca slipped the jacket on. It was a lot warmer than the lifeboat's foil blanket. Maybe some clothes and canned goods. Even if we don't find anything, it'll be a lot more comfortable and safer waiting for rescue here. A familiar bulge rubbed Luca's bare chest. He reached into the inner pocket, finding a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. He said a silent prayer before opening the box. He thumbed the top back and sighed happily. There were still 3 smokes left. Chance shook his head. He knelt for a bottle of Pepsi on the floor and checked for an expiration date. February 2010. He tossed the bottle to Luca. This shit heap's been floating for at least 3 years. Or just been out of service that long, Luca said, taking a pull off the cigarette. Things are definitely looking up. Let's see if we can find some damn clothes. They managed to scrounge up some coveralls in the abandoned crew lockers, as well as a few more stale smokes for Luca's pack. Growling stomachs told them to forego any further pillaging until they checked out the food stores. They proceeded carefully through the corridors to find the galley falling apart. Pots and pans lay strewn about, and the entire place had an odd stench to it. Chance shined the flashlight around the perimeter. Jackpot, he said, signaling to the series of shelves lined with canned goods. Luca nodded, but was more interested in the smell. He examined the prep surfaces, finding spots of what appeared to be dried blood from the crew's final meal and rodent droppings. He moved the light to the floor and grimaced. The entire surface was speckled with rat shit. He opened a drawer below the table, finding an assortment of butcher knives dotted with rust and stored carelessly. Some primitive fear gnawing at his brain told him to take one. He ignored it and slammed the drawer shut before joining Chase at the shelves. We got Chef Boyardee, Chance said. Never thought I'd be so happy to see that fat fuck's face. He lifted the can and scrunched his nose curiously. He shook the can. What the fuck is this? He dropped it and grabbed another, shaking it and then tossing it over his shoulder. And then a third. They're empty! Luca knelt for the can of ravioli and rolled it over. A massive hole had been torn through the backside. Check it, he said. Chance glanced down, then turned one around on the shelf. One big hole and some smaller puncture marks locked the tin. Luca slowly panned his light up the shelves. Dried sauces and soups stained them along with the occasional, shriveled morsel of food. Cardboard boxes were little more than scraps. They both looked around hurriedly. Bags of salt, sugar, and flour had all been torn open, with their contents spilled and tracked away by tiny feet. Well, at least we still have the MREs from the lifeboat, Luca offered. I've never been so disappointed in my life, Chance sighed. Even when our ship exploded and we almost got eaten by sharks? Luca shrugged. Weird priorities, bro. Think they're dead? The rats, I mean. Maybe from heart disease after eating all that. Chance illuminated the shelves again. We need to get our strength back. We should find a place to sleep. Metal clanked somewhere down the narrow corridors. Luca and Chance turned in unison and shined their lights, then laughed at each other's paranoia. They wandered back to the cabins. Luca paid more attention to where they stepped, noting more droppings. They opened the first passenger cabin they came to. That same stench from the kitchen was much worse. Something clamored in the darkness. Chance stepped in first. The mattress looked like it had been used for target practice. Stuffing exploded out of dozens of holes and was dragged around the floor. A built-in dresser had been chewed to the point it had collapsed on itself. A spider's web was intricately spun across the wrecked frame. Luca had his light on it. A big orb weaver occupied the middle. Something shimmered inside the ruined drawer beneath the arachnid. This place needs a better housekeeper. Chance aimed his light to the bed. Did that just move? Luca asked. Like waterbed moved or like exorcist moved? They watched the mattress suspiciously, but nothing happened. Chance shook his head. Bad lighting and waves, he chuckled. Fuck, we need to see if we can get the electricity on, man. I can't stand this haunted house shit. That would mean going below deck, Luca reminded him. Actually, I'm really good with not having electricity. Luca looked for the spider once more, but found it was gone and the web just dangling strands. He didn't mention it as they left to inspect the next room. It was in the same condition, as were the next two. Chance stopped at the fifth cabin and rested his hand on the latch. I don't give a fuck anymore, he said. Trashed or not, this is my room for the night. I am beat. He opened the door, slowly, with ignorantly high hopes considering the state of the ship and their running luck. Everything was ransacked as in the others. Chance threw his hands up in defeat and went to the bed, flopping back onto it. Luca sat in a nearby chair. Chance was right. There wasn't any reason to check the other rooms. They needed to rest. It could be days before rescue came, and the flashlight batteries wouldn't last forever. They'd have to work during the day, paint a message on the deck for helicopters to see, try to clean up the bridge so they could keep watch, and look for anything else that might be useful. He laid his head back and closed his eyes. There still wasn't any way in hell he'd sleep on one of the beds. The chair would be just fine. Then it collapsed.
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Chance bolted upright in a panic, but then broke into laughter when he saw his friend sprawled out on the floor. Luca sat up against the wall. He smiled, wanting to laugh too, but couldn't. Something was squishing under his palm, and his smile started to melt as he moved to see what it was. The rat leg was still bloody and connected to its tail by minuscule strings of meat. Luca held it up by the tail for Chance to see, but the morsel fell to pieces in an instant. Guess the rats aren't dead, Luca said. That one is, Chance chuckled. He's still wet. It was a fresh kill. Luca searched the room with the light. Think there might be a cat on board too? No. Chance's voice sounded off. Worried. He lowered his voice to a whisper. Dude, this bed is definitely moving. Chance pulled at a tattered blanket and shrieked. Dozens of tiny, hairless red bodies wriggled over one another in the folds. He scrambled to the end of the bed and toppled into the floor. His flashlight rolled away in a wide arc, casting its glow wildly around the room. Luca watched the pointy nose push through a hole in the mattress before the light changed direction. When it rolled back around, the rat was halfway out. It hissed and screeched. Pipes rattled overhead. Scratches came from inside the walls. Luca pressed himself to the wall and stood slowly. "I think we need to go back to the lifeboat," he whispered. Something clattered in the lavatory. He peeked inside, but saw nothing in the darkness. He shined the light back to his friend, then to the rat in the bed. The mattress pulsed as others came out of the holes, sometimes wrestling over each other to get through the same exit. Luca shined the light in the bathroom in time to see a dozen of them spilling out of the toilet. One ran up his leg before he even saw it. He swatted it with the light. It hit the floor, stunned, but still alive. Its brethren swarmed it. They tore off limbs and attacked one another over the piece. Luca's bare toes blazed with sudden pain. He kicked and stomped at the rodents, gnawing them. "God damn it, we've got to go!" Luca twisted around and gagged. The tail twitched wildly as the rat forced itself into Chance's mouth. Others had converged on him from the bed. His legs were invisible beneath the writhing mass of furry bodies. An opportunistic adult pounced on the unguarded babies, devouring them greedily. Luca ran for the door without looking. He hit the hallway, sliding on a squished carcass. The army of rodents pursued him, the corridor filled with the squeaks, hisses, and chirps. Their numbers so great that he could hear the tiny claws scraping the flooring in their efforts to catch up. A pipe broke and swung down from the ceiling, spilling out more in front of him. Their inaudible ultrasonic calls carried through the ghost ship like a dinner bell. Luca changed directions, pushing into a rec room. Rats poked their heads out of the pockets of a fallen billiards table. A fat one stopped chewing a forgotten paperback and stared at Luca with its beady eyes. Luca searched for an exit. A half-dozen rats fell from a cupboard with their tails fused together from hiding in the tight space for too long. Luca screamed at the sight of the Rat King scurrying toward him as one unit. He slammed the door behind him, bisecting one of the pursuers. Luca jumped into the air and came down on the Rat King, crushing 3 components instantly. The other bit down on his feet. He shook them off, kicking them from the other side of the room, but they dragged their dead comrades along as they re-entered the fray. Luca pulled a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed at the nearest rats first, then to the others. It drove them back, but they didn't flee. They hissed at him from a safe distance. The ones in the hall were grating their claws and teeth at the door, frantically. They'd be through it in minutes. Luca used the fire extinguisher to clear a path to the window and smashed it with the canister. He climbed out of the frame but was too fixated on the rats to pay attention to his exit. The glass sliced the back of his leg, causing him to fall through. Out on the deck, there were no rats. Yet. He crawled until he could stand and limped quickly to the lifeboat. Rats were descending the rope. Some fell off in the strong breeze, but the others continued, undaunted. He leaned over the guardrail. There was enough moonlight to see several of the critters fighting over one of the ration packs. More were chewing on the boat itself. Luca backed away from his last chance at salvation. He looked up at the ship's funnels. 100 huge, dark bodies clamored out of the smokestacks. A wave of rats climbed through the rec room window. Some sliced themselves on the shards of glass, but kept coming. So hungry for Luca that they ignored the gashed flesh and spilling organs. A massive 2-foot rat leapt down between Luca and the horde. More of the monsters lined the roof. They didn't make as much noise as the normal ones. 4 of the big ones crawled down, calmly. Luca looked up at the squadron of giants waiting like gargoyles. The monsters had come up from the engine room. It would have been warmest there and provided access to the entire ship. It was the perfect place to nest. The most dominant ones would have taken it for their own. There they grew into a thriving community of seafaring rodents eating their way through the smaller ones upstairs and laying claim to the whole of the Lyudmila Gurchenko. The small ones squeaked between themselves. Another wave gathered on the deck behind Luca. More giants came down, intimidating them with their presence. Little ones jumped onto the guardrails. Some dived into the ocean to escape. Others ran for the rope, climbing to the safety of the lifeboat. Luca snarled. First, they tried to eat him. Now they were stealing his boat. Luca screamed with primal rage and ran at the nearest giant. He kicked it hard enough to collapse its torso. It slid into the horde. They sniffed at it for seconds and chirped amongst themselves. The rooftop rats hissed a warning. The little ones didn't care. It was time for revenge. Time for a meal. They tore the fallen monster apart, ending the standoff. Luca watched in amazement as the two factions went to war. They swarmed over the larger ones, trying to use their numbers to overpower them. The big ones fought back, taking quick bites that severed heads clean from twitching bodies. Luca charged forward, running into the fray. Rodent guts squished between his toes as he trampled over them. Opportunistic bites took chunks and strips from his legs. Some pounced, others climbed. He pulled and slapped at them, trying desperately to keep them away from arteries. One of the big ones sprang onto his back, knocking him face first to the deck. He rolled repeatedly, trying to smash it, but it leapt clear. It lunged at him as he tried to stand, and they tumbled over the guardrail. Luca clung to the wet steel. The monster rat climbed up him, digging its claws into his face. Luca wasn't going to die alone. He bit into the giant's belly. It attacked his face in retaliation. Luca bit again, using his head to press the creature against a rail and chewed his way deep into its guts. The rat fell away, taking Luca's eye with it to the ocean below. Luca dangled from the railing one-handed. He swung the other up and adjusted his grip while he weighed his options. A rat crawled along the steel, sniffing at his fingers. "Don't you fucking dare, you little shit," he growled. It dared. The bucked teeth raked the skin from his knuckle. He reached over and grabbed it, squeezing it until it popped in his fist. He climbed over the railing and fell back onto the deck. He dragged himself to the bridge, chancing a glance over his shoulder. The battle seemed to be over. Victorious rodents stayed topside and stripped the dead to their bones, while the losers limped away to be eaten by their own kind, back in the mattresses and the walls of the passenger cabins. Luca wondered if this was a regular occurrence. Did they have to cull their own numbers every so often, or did they just enjoy it? Luca watched the flashing beacon atop the lifeboat drift away from the Lyudmila. The rats had chewed through the rope. Crazy as it sounded, he knew they did it on purpose. He limped up the stairs and left the door open. There were too many ways they could get inside to bother shutting it anyhow. He pulled a cigarette from the pack, slipped into the captain's seat, and watched the sun breaking the horizon. At least he was headed in the right direction, he thought, as he lit the bent cigarette. He took a long drag. A tiny rat scurried out of the instrument panel and cleaned its paws. Luca blew a smoke ring at him. The runt jumped into his lap, but didn't make a move to attack him. "All right then, Willie," Luca said softly. "You can be my quartermaster." The rat settled into his lap. Luca watched it, expectantly, but it still didn't bite. Blood dripped onto it from his still torn face. It twitched and tried to clean itself off. Luca sheltered the animal with his hand. Crimson drops rolled down his knuckles. He looked back up to the horizon and smiled. There was a new crew captain on the ship of the cannibal rats. Well, my spookies, I hope tonight's story helped you feel a urge to sail the seven seas, or, more than likely, feel the need to avoid your bathtub for a little while, at least until the smell starts to get to you. Thank you all so much for joining me for another terror tale, and if this is your first time here, we have a brand new one every single Wednesday and over 300 episodes for you to take a look at. So, make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. You will not want to miss it. And I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been joining up over at weeklyspooky.com/join. For as little as $1 a month, you get access to a massive catalog of exclusive audiobooks, creepypasta readings, and so much more, including 2 exclusive episodes every single month. That's weeklyspooky.com/join. And I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters. These are folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And we have a brand new booster to welcome this week. 2 of them, in fact. A big thank you to Kate and Lulu, as well as Jessica Fuller, Johnny Nix, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Brent McCullough, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much for your support, and if you want to hear your name at the end of the show, like Kate and Lulu, head to weeklyspooky.com and select a tier at $15 a month or higher. We appreciate it so much, and it makes a huge difference in helping us bring you the spooky on the weekly. But now it's time for me to get back to work. There are so many shows to bring you on Friday and Monday, as well as our usual Wednesday. So, for myself, for my executive producer Rob Fields, Mark Shields, and Bobbletopia.com, my producer Dan Wilder, and my composer Ray Mattis, I will be talking at you very soon. But until then, make sure there's nothing hiding in the walls, waiting to eat you.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.